You can fake it. Strength, confidence, kindness, ambition, discipline, it can all be faked. For a while. You can dress it up, rehearse it in the mirror, get the tone just right, and even convince a few people. But there are a few small specific behaviors that will always expose the truth. And Machiavelli, he built his legacy on spotting them. He lived in a world of liars, flatterers, and opportunists. He didn't have the luxury of guessing who was strong and who was just loud. He needed certainty. He needed a system. Because in his game power, one weak link could destroy everything. So he learned how to read people. Not by their claims, their smiles, or even their threats, but by their patterns. The unconscious automatic things they did when no one was looking. Weakness doesn't shout. It leaks through cracks, gestures, tone. You've probably seen it too, even if you didn't realize it. The colleague who talks too much to sound certain. The friend who's always overly agreeable. The influencer who can't go a day without posting something empowering just to feel seen. At first glance, they all seem different. But dig deeper and you'll notice a pattern. And once you can see the pattern, you gain something Machiavelli used like a blade, the power to detect and disarm weakness before it sabotages you. Let's start with the first one. The quietest, the easiest to miss overjustification. It's subtle, but once you see it, it's everywhere. Weak men explain, strong men decide. That's the entire distinction. If someone's constantly explaining why they said something, why they did something, why they think something, that's not transparency, that's insecurity leaking out. Machiavelli saw this all the time in court. The prince, truly powerful, spoke little. His decisions were sharp and final. But the advisors, the ministers, the bureaucrats, clinging to their reputation like a lifeline, they talked endlessly, clarifying, elaborating, repeating themselves. Why? Because they weren't sure if their thoughts were valid until someone else approved them. This is what overjustification really is, a desperate plea for reassurance. It's the sound of someone saying, "Please believe me so I can believe myself." It's not strength. It's self-doubt with a voice. And Machiavelli wasn't fooled by the language. He didn't care how noble or logical someone sounded. He knew what he was really hearing, a man begging for permission to exist. Think about it. How often do you hear someone say, "Well, let me explain," when no one asks them to? How often do you find yourself repeating a point just to make it sound more acceptable? It's a trap. Because if your decisions need to be explained to everyone around you before you stand by them, they're not decisions. They're auditions. And that kind of man will never be trusted with real power. Because power requires silence. Power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't defend itself. It moves. Machiavelli understood that power isn't in the words, it's in the conviction behind the silence. Next time you're in a room and someone keeps defending their point, repeating themselves, trying to sound reasonable or morally correct, pause. You're not witnessing confidence. You're watching insecurity in slow motion. But that's just the beginning. The second behavior is more polished. It wears a smile. But it's no less dangerous. Weaponized niceness. Now this one fools people all the time, because on the surface, who doesn't love a nice person? The guy who always agrees, always compliments, always seems agreeable, seems like a team player, right? Machiavelli knew better. He understood that true kindness is never compulsive. A strong man can be kind, but it's deliberate. It has boundaries. He knows when to say no. He knows when to speak up, even if it causes discomfort. His kindness doesn't compromise his posture. The weak man, however, uses niceness as a survival tactic. He agrees not because he agrees, but because he's afraid. He stays quiet when he should speak. He apologizes just to avoid conflict, not because he's wrong. He compliments to be liked, not because he means it. It's all a strategy, submissiveness, wearing a mask. And when this niceness fails, when he doesn't get the validation he's quietly craving, it flips. He becomes bitter, sarcastic, passive-aggressive. You've seen it. That guy who's nice until he doesn't get his way. Suddenly he's cold, distant, angry. Because his kindness was never real, it was conditional. Machiavelli wrote, "A prince must learn how to do wrong, but never unless compelled." That's restraint. But the fake nice guy, he doesn't restrain from power, he restrains from fear. And fear is always unstable. This is the kind of man Machiavelli couldn't trust. Because under pressure, he collapses. He can't handle conflict. He can't set boundaries. And when that pressure hits, he doesn't stand tall, he tries to disappear. And that makes him a liability. Because power isn't just about being nice or not. It's about the ability to face discomfort, to maintain dignity when challenged, and to walk into conflict without shrinking. Weaponized niceness is weakness in disguise, and the disguise always falls apart when tested. And now we arrive at the third behavior, the loudest, the most humiliating to witness, display addiction. You know the type. Can't stop posting, always needs to be noticed. Turns every conversation into a performance. Every story is exaggerated. Every action needs an audience. To most, it seems like confidence, but to Machiavelli, it screamed desperation. Because a man who needs to be seen is terrified of being forgotten. This isn't about ego. It's about identity rot. This man's sense of self is so hollow, he needs constant reminders that he matters. Likes praise, admiration, he clings to them like life preservers. And this is the kind of man who will betray, exaggerate, and self-destruct just to stay relevant. Machiavelli saw it clearly. A man addicted to visibility is easy to control. You don't attack him, you don't confront him, you simply ignore him, and he will crumble, because his sense of self only exists when someone else reflects it back. That's the essence of weakness dependency on external validation. Machiavelli didn't see these men as threats. He saw them as tools. Because once you recognize overjustification, fake kindness, and display addiction, you don't fear these men. You understand them. And once you understand them, you can control them without force, without conflict. You just stay silent, and they'll do the work for you. Now that you see the three behaviors, overjustification, weaponized niceness, and display addiction, you begin to realize something deeper. These aren't just signs of weakness. They're invitations. They're signals. Signals that tell you exactly how to manipulate someone without ever needing to raise your voice or flex your strength. Machiavelli didn't fear weakness. He studied it. He collected it like data. While most men reacted to weakness with annoyance or contempt, he saw something more valuable: leverage. Weakness was a blueprint, and he knew exactly what to do with it. Start with the overjustifier. The man who explains everything, who needs you to agree with him so he can agree with himself. Machiavelli wouldn't challenge this man. He wouldn't argue. That would only escalate the insecurity and risk exposure. No, he would nod, quietly. He'd offer a simple phrase that makes perfect sense. And just like that, the overjustifier would be hooked. Validation is like a drug to him. Rare, unexpected agreement. That's a jackpot. Now he wants more. He starts aligning with you, defending you, advocating for you. And all it took was a nod at the right time. Machiavelli didn't have to say much. He just had to make the weak man feel understood. But it wasn't understanding. It was emotional bait. Then there's the people pleaser, the appeaser, the agreeable one who bends his own spine to make others comfortable. Machiavelli would watch this man carefully, because deep down this isn't kindness. It's fear of being alone, rejected, forgotten. So what does Machiavelli do? He gives him a role. He gives him a small task, a position, something that feels exclusive, something that whispers, "You're important here." And instantly the pleaser feels chosen, valued, safe. Now he's not just following you, he needs you. Not out of loyalty, but because without your acceptance, he has no identity. Machiavelli would never need to demand obedience from this kind of man. The threat of losing favor would keep him in line. He would self-regulate, self-censor, self-sacrifice just to stay included. And then comes the most predictable of all, the display addict. The man addicted to the spotlight. Now Machiavelli could have laughed at this man. He could have mocked him, pushed him aside. But instead, he offered something much more powerful: the illusion of influence. He would let this man speak in public. Take credit for ideas that Machiavelli planted. Wear fancy clothes. Sit at the front of meetings. He gave him everything he wanted: attention, so he never realized how little power he actually had. Behind the curtain, Machiavelli was pulling the strings, writing the script, guiding every move, and the display addict too busy admiring his own reflection to notice. This is how true Machiavellian power operates. You don't dominate through force. You dominate through design. Let the weak perform. Let them think they're leading. As long as they stay addicted to your approval, your recognition, your guidance, they're yours. And if they ever step out of line, you don't punish them. You vanish. You withdraw the very thing they crave attention, and they collapse. Because the weak man is not built for silence. He lives in noise. And when that noise disappears, he falls apart. This is why Machiavelli warned, never let a weak man believe he's your equal. Not even for a second. Because the moment he thinks he no longer needs you, he will try to rise against you. Not out of principle, but out of delusion. So Machiavelli kept the gap wide. Just enough validation to keep them moving, never enough to make them feel independent. And if they dared challenge him, he didn't retaliate. He replaced them. Because weak men are not rare. Desperate validation seekers are in endless supply. There's always another overjustifier, another appeaser, another spotlight addict willing to trade loyalty for recognition. You don't need to fight weak men. You just need to know how to use them. Now imagine what this looks like in a workplace, or in politics, or even in your personal life. The loudest voice in the meeting explaining every decision, defending every move. Overjustifier. The agreeable coworker who never says no, always smiling, always helpful, but clearly burning out from saying yes to everything. Weaponized niceness. The guy who needs constant recognition, posting about every small win, bragging about insignificant tasks, always performing. Display addict. You don't need to attack these people. You just need to watch, listen, understand their patterns. And once you do, you know exactly how to gain influence without confrontation. This is the psychological puppeteering Machiavelli mastered. Not because he hated people, but because he knew people. He understood human insecurity like a surgeon understands anatomy. He knew how to cut, where to press, and how to stitch things together so they never saw the wound. Now here's where it gets uncomfortable. You start to realize these aren't just behaviors you see in others. You see them in yourself. That moment you explained too much in a conversation, hoping they'd understand you. That time you said yes even though you wanted to say no because you didn't want to disappoint them. That post you shared not because it mattered, but because you needed to feel significant. We've all done it. We've all slipped into weak behavior. And that's why Machiavelli's most powerful lesson wasn't about controlling others. It was about controlling yourself. Because until you master your own need for approval, you will always be vulnerable to those who can offer it. Until you quiet your craving to be seen, someone will always use visibility as a leash. Until you can sit in silence and not panic, someone will always bait you with noise. Machiavelli feared weakness, but most of all, he feared the weakness within himself. And so he turned his lens inward. To understand power, Machiavelli had to understand weakness not just in others, but in his own reflection. Because if you can't detect it in yourself, you'll never outgrow it. And if you don't outgrow it, someone else will always see it before you do and use it against you. So he built a system, not just for ruling over others, but for ruling over himself. First, he watched how he explained things. You can feel the shift when you move from speaking with conviction to speaking for approval. It's subtle, like walking into a room that's just a little too warm. One extra sentence, one repeated phrase, one unnecessary apology. That's when Machiavelli would pause and ask, am I standing firm, or am I begging to be accepted? And if it was the latter, he stopped speaking. Because the longer you explain yourself, the more you give away that you don't believe in your own authority. Second, he studied how often he said yes. People treat agreement like a virtue. Like saying yes makes you noble, makes you liked, makes you a team player. But Machiavelli saw it differently. He saw yes as a potential act of self-betrayal. Because saying yes to things you don't believe in doesn't make you kind. It makes you complicit in your own erosion. So he began to pause before every yes. He asked himself, would I agree if I didn't fear losing their approval? And if the answer was no, he declined, without guilt, without performance, just a clear no. Because he understood that every yes carries weight. And when your word becomes cheap, your identity follows. Third, he measured his relationship to silence. Weak men hate silence. It makes them sweat. They fill it with jokes, compliments, over-explanations, anything to escape the discomfort. Because silence is where the truth gets too loud to ignore. So Machiavelli practiced being still. In conversations, in meetings, in confrontations, he learned to let silence hang heavy in the air. To watch how others squirmed inside it. And more importantly, he watched how he squirmed. He tracked the internal flinch, the urge to say something just to say it, and he trained it out of himself. Because when silence becomes your ally, it turns into presence. And presence once mastered doesn't need to speak to be respected. Fourth, he avoided unnecessary exposure. This one feels radical in a world obsessed with visibility. Everyone wants to be seen, everyone wants to be known. But Machiavelli understood the power of restraint. The weak man announces every move, shares every thought, demands constant recognition. But the strong man, he's surgical with his visibility. He doesn't move until everything is in place. He lets the others chatter, predict, overextend, and then he arrives. Not as a slow build-up, but as a silent eruption. This wasn't mystique. This was strategy. Because people don't fear what they understand. They fear what they can't figure out. And Machiavelli made sure no one could quite figure him out. That was his armor. That was his edge. And now you begin to see what he really built. Not just tactics, not just a list of do's and don'ts. He created a blueprint for removing weakness before the world had the chance to weaponize it. Because here's what most men do. They try to appear powerful without becoming powerful. They dress the part, speak with authority, post quotes about stoicism, but underneath they still explain themselves, still crave attention, still collapse under disapproval. That's not power. That's theater. Real strength begins with subtraction. You strip away every behavior rooted in fear. You silence the reflex to seek approval. You reject the need to be seen. You stop performing and start deciding. And what you're left with? It's not loud. It's not flashy. It's a kind of stillness that unsettles people. Because they can't read you. They don't know what motivates you. They don't know if they've pleased you or disappointed you. And that uncertainty forces them to adjust to you. This is how Machiavelli flipped the power dynamic. Not by proving himself louder than others, but by mastering what others couldn't even see in themselves. And when people did start to notice, they didn't know what to call it. Respect, fear, curiosity. All they knew was that when he entered the room, the rules changed. And that wasn't magic. It was engineering. You see, Machiavelli didn't just remove weak behaviors. He replaced them with rituals, habits, disciplines that strengthened his mind like a fortress. He reminded himself daily that over-explaining wasn't clarity, it was insecurity. That saying yes too quickly wasn't generosity, it was a lack of boundaries. That compulsive visibility wasn't confidence, it was desperation. That the desire to be liked could be the death of everything worth becoming. He waged a quiet war against himself every day. And that's why he won the wars that mattered. Because the greatest threats don't come from outside you. They come from the small, silent, shameful compromises you make when no one's watching. The ones you excuse. The ones you call harmless. The ones you repeat until they become your personality. Machiavelli refused to let that happen. And if you want to build true presence, the kind that changes the temperature in a room without you needing to speak, you'll have to do the same. But it won't come from reading quotes or wearing sharp suits or building a curated image. It will come from watching yourself in silence, from asking hard questions, from choosing discomfort over approval, and from killing the version of you that needs to be seen, heard, and liked just to feel real. Because that version, that's the one they control. That's the one they exploit. That's the one that breaks. The version that remains, that's the one that rules. So now you've removed the weak behaviors, the endless explaining, the compulsive people-pleasing, the hunger for attention. You've silenced your panic in silence. You've said no when it scared you. You've withheld your presence when it felt like death to go unseen. What happens next? People begin to notice. But not in the way you think. They don't come to you with applause. They don't flood you with compliments. Instead, something strange happens. They adjust. They hesitate before speaking to you. They measure their words. They don't interrupt you even when you're quiet. They don't talk over you like they used to. Why? Because now your silence speaks louder than their noise. Now your restraint feels heavier than their enthusiasm. Now your approval is not assumed, it's earned, and that shift changes everything. Machiavelli understood this better than anyone. He knew that power was never really about domination. It was about calibration. You become the standard others measure themselves against. You don't chase their respect, they calibrate their behavior to secure yours. And the moment they do that, you win. Without lifting a finger, without issuing a command, without raising your voice. But Machiavelli didn't stop there. Once you've built this presence, you don't maintain it through consistency. You maintain it through unpredictability. This is the twist. Most people, once they get power, start handing out approval like candy. They think generosity will earn them loyalty. But loyalty earned through predictability is cheap. It's routine. It creates comfort, and comfort weakens the structure. So Machiavelli flipped the script. He rewarded unpredictably. Some days he praised. Other days he ignored. Some days he asked for advice. Other days he said nothing. Why? Because inconsistency creates anticipation. And anticipation creates obsession. They never knew when it was coming. And that's what made it valuable. Like a rare coin, a whispered compliment from Machiavelli became something people replayed in their heads for days. They talked about it, speculated about it. They performed harder the next time, just hoping they'd earn another glance, another nod. It wasn't manipulation. It was psychological gravity. He didn't demand loyalty. He designed it. And here's what's even more unsettling: people loved it. They didn't resent the mystery. They didn't question the silence. They craved it. Because deep down, most people want to be led. They want to follow someone who isn't chasing the same applause they're chasing. They want to be near something stable, something still. That's the paradox. The more you try to be understood, the more replaceable you become. But the more comfortable you are being unreadable, the more unforgettable you become. Because presence is built on boundaries, and the rarest boundary in the modern world is internal stillness. Now you're not just respected, you're studied. And when they study you, they start adjusting everything they do to keep your attention. You've gone from being a participant in their world to being the axis around which their behavior spins. This is power most people never touch. Not because it's hard to reach, but because it's hard to let go of the things that block it. The need to explain, gone. The need to be liked, gone. The need to be seen, gone. All that remains is clarity, precision, poise. But Machiavelli had one more layer, the part that most people miss. The part that turns this from a personal system into an empire-building mechanism. He didn't just use his power to maintain his own image. He used it to build with weak men. Yes, you heard that right. He didn't reject them. He didn't try to turn them into strong men. He used their flaws because their flaws were predictable. And predictability is a tool. He gave the overjustifier validation. He gave the people-pleaser belonging. He gave the display addict recognition. And then he let them build his palace with their desperation. He let them run errands, spread influence, gather information, and enforce his ideas because each of them believed they were finally seen, finally valued, finally important. But none of them were the architect. Machiavelli was. They were building for him, but they thought they were building for themselves. This is what true psychological engineering looks like. You don't argue with weakness. You don't expose it. You weaponize it. You use it to extend your reach, expand your influence, and shield your core from exposure. And if any of them turn on you, you don't fight them. You cut the signal. You take away the validation, the belonging, the recognition, and they collapse. Because when you've given someone's ego its structure, all you have to do is remove your presence and they lose their spine. It's cruel, it's cold, but it's clean. Because no one can accuse you of manipulation when all you did was listen, nod reward, and disappear. That's what scared Machiavelli the most. Weak men weren't dangerous because they were aggressive. They were dangerous because they were pliable, shapeable, moldable. They became whatever the strongest personality in the room needed them to be. And if you weren't the strongest personality, someone else would fill that void and use them against you. So Machiavelli made sure he was the strongest force they ever encountered. And he never had to raise his voice to do it. He simply learned what they needed and became the only person who could give it to them. That's not leadership. That's possession. So now you've seen the full cycle. The overjustifier, the pleaser, the performer, each one exposing himself not through grand failures, but through subtle daily behaviors that scream, "I don't know who I am without your approval." And Machiavelli, he didn't fix them. He didn't mentor them. He didn't warn them. He used them. And that's where most people flinch. That's where modern minds want to step back and say, "Isn't that too manipulative?" But Machiavelli didn't ask that question because he knew something more dangerous than manipulation dependence. He knew that if he didn't guide these weak men, someone else would. And that someone else might be dumber, crueler, or less strategic. So he took the reins. Not because he needed control, but because he refused to be controlled by someone with less discipline. and more noise. And this is where your own test begins. Because it's one thing to spot weakness in others. It's another to never let it back into yourself. Because weakness is persistent. It doesn't die. It waits. It changes shape. It whispers instead of shouts. One day it shows up as over-explaining yourself in a meeting. The next it arrives when you apologize for a boundary you had every right to set. Then, on some lonely afternoon, it slips into your fingers as you post anything, just to feel relevant. Weakness doesn't beg for attention. It convinces you that you need attention to survive. So Machiavelli built walls, not just around his kingdom, but around his mind, around his emotional reflexes, around his sense of self. He stripped away behaviors that made him easy to read, easy to please, easy to bait. And in their place, he installed silence. He installed restraint. He installed presence. Because presence, real presence, isn't built on charisma. It's built on what you refuse to give away. You don't flinch. You don't explain. You don't apologize unless it serves your strategy. And when you walk into a room, you don't bring your voice first. You bring your gravity. Machiavelli understood something few people ever do. Most men are not led by strategy. They are led by emotion. They follow the loudest thing in the room, the strongest feeling, not the smartest plan. So he made sure that he was the one orchestrating those emotions, not by stirring them wildly, but by keeping his own perfectly still. This is why people trusted him, feared him, followed him. Because in a world of reactivity, stillness feels like power. And power, when done right, never feels forced. It feels natural. People start to assume you know something they don't. That you see further, deeper, clearer, that you've mastered something invisible. And that assumption, that's where your influence begins. Because now they don't just respect you, they calibrate their behavior to maintain your respect. But there's one more move. The final Machiavellian tactic that locks this system in place. You make your respect expensive. You don't give it easily. You don't flatter casually. You don't reward everyone just for trying. Because the moment your praise becomes common, it becomes meaningless. So you hold it back. You say less than you feel. You smile less than you think. You nod less than they want. And slowly, without saying it, you create a hierarchy. Not by title, not by status, but by energy. Because now people don't just want to succeed. They want you to see them succeed. They want your approval even if they pretend they don't. They check your reactions when they speak. They remember your silence longer than your compliments. They interpret your absence as a test, and it changes them. They either rise to meet your standard or they disappear. Either way you win, because the room becomes self-regulating. You don't need to police behavior. The fear of losing your respect does it for you. And here's the real power. No one can accuse you of manipulating them. You didn't demand anything. You didn't promise anything. You didn't yell, argue, guilt trip, or flatter. You just existed sharpened. And they bent around that presence like gravity around a star. Because when you've removed the soft, leaky behaviors that make most men predictable, people don't just respect you. They fear disappointing you. Not because you punish them, but because they've seen what your silence feels like. And silence, when earned and withheld, is the most unsettling mirror a man can face. That's the endgame Machiavelli was playing. Not to dominate, not to impress, but to become the invisible variable that changes every calculation in the room. So let the weak keep exposing themselves. Let them over-explain. Let them apologize for things they believe in. Let them post and perform and panic under pressure. And you stay still. You stay measured. You stay unreadable. Until one day they realize they were never competing with you. They were performing for you. And that performance, you directed it without ever raising your hand.